15. But then I saw one letter from, said it was gonna be like an upcharge to go from 30 to 15.
Okay, we're ready.
Hang on a second. We don't have a quorum yet, do we? We're all the money people.
I don't see anybody on Zoom yet.
Nothing on Zoom yet?
It's been a while. Do we need to push those or they?
So we have.
We'll give
how many
it
voting
a few
members?
minutes.
Seven?
Huh?
We have six
Chris
or seven
Masters
voting.
is on Zoom.
So don't mind
There's Chris.
Who we got?
That's Chris Masters.
sighing heavily.
So you're a voting member tonight or the alternate?
No, Chris is there.
Okay.
Chris
So I
Chris
am the
is-
alternate.
So that's four.
I knew Chris was gonna be here.
That's enough.
Huh?
We have
We
four.
got enough?
Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Chris, can you hear us?
All right, we're ready,
I
we're
can
gonna
hear you.
open it. Chris, thank you. Good evening, my name is Mike Shepherd, and I'm standing in as the chair of the ESBC 2 this evening. The normal chair, John, is away in Chicago last minute, and Tiffany is involved with some kind of other business, so I'm gonna do it. And we have minutes to approve from, let's see, ta-da, September 15th, I believe.
Double check. They are September 13th.
13th, I'm sorry.
September 13th or August?
August 13th.
It's, yeah.
Does everybody have a chance to look at them? Pretty short, 45-minute meeting. I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes as written.
So moved.
Thank you, sir. Second?
Second?
Thank you, Joe Good. So since we're doing the Zoom thing, we have to do a roll call vote. I'm going to start with you, Chris. How do you vote on the minutes from August 13th,
Yes.
September 13th? I'm sorry, buddy.
No, August, you're right.
August 13th.
It was August, okay.
Yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Chadwick? All right, and I'll vote. I can't vote, I was absent. Okay. I'll abstain. Thank you. We have requests for payment.
One abstain, two vote.
Yeah.
3, 4, 1.
3, 4, 1 abstain. Can we do it? If it doesn't work, I won't abstain. I wasn't at the meeting.
Yeah, you're all set.
You're all set? We're good? Okay, thank you. Elementary School Building Committee. We have invoice number OPM-116-29 from Vertex in the amount of $333,333.33. A lot of threes there. One from Perkins Eastman for $400,000 even. One from Pius, PHIUS for $33,700. One from Local IQ for $69.07. And one 24-351 from Lucas Environmental in the amount of $2,340 even. The total amount on this invoice is $469,442.40. Do I have a motion to approve the invoice?
So moved.
Thank you, sir.
Second?
Good, thank you. Well, again, we'll do a roll call vote. Chris, you're first.
Yes.
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 William? Yes.
Yes.
Zagrud, yes. And I'll be a yes, thank you. I don't know how you want to handle this signature business with John.
John will send me one electronically.
He'll, all right,
Yes,
great,
thank you.
thank you. With that, as everybody probably knows, the ESBC is before both the Planning Board and the Conservation Commission. Last night, we met with the Planning Board. They didn't close it, they extended it. Tonight, the team is meeting with the Conservation Commission right now, or at least at 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock.
And I expect they'll be pretty close to closure. With that being said, we have a presentation from Bob, I suspect, on the 60% CD costs to the school. And Bob, you have the floor.
Great.
We need,
Can we get that?
need that on.
Okay, and Jeff, you want me to say next, or you can just see my screen where I am? Okay.
Bob, hold up just a second. I really fouled up and I apologize. We're supposed to have a period for public comment at the meeting, at the beginning of the meeting. Hearing nobody sitting here, and I suspect there's no one on TV, I suspect we'll have no one. Is that the case?
Yeah. Chris is the only one online, right?
Yeah.
We're-
That's right, we're online.
No, but I'm saying Chris is the
On
only one
Chris,
online.
yes.
Chris is on, yeah. All right, moving on. Thank you, Robert.
Great, okay. So we just wanted to start with a look at what has changed since the design development set. We're now at 60% construction documents, and we've just completed a cost estimate. So this is really pretty high level, and this is something that we need to prepare for the MSBA submission so they can keep track of any differences, make sure we're holding up to the integrity of the educational plan and program. So starting with the site, you can see there's kind of just a macro site plan off to the left and a zoomed-in version. So we could point out a few things. Since design development, we have actually added approximately 40 parking spaces and done a slight reconfiguration and adjustment to the field location. This was to help avoid some wetland setbacks. And the parking was an additional, something that came out of comments that we received from the various regulatory approvals and meetings. We've also included some end islands. So on the parking spaces, you can see there's a strip of green space that separates the different parking runs. Also at the ends of those, there's a little bit of an island, and that's something that's desired from a planning board point of view. We've also been looking at this from a snow removal point of view and talking to Tim and facilities about making sure we're keeping enough storage and the ability to easily plow. We also talked about, and it's not shown in this plan, but there'll be a slight revision to the crosswalks, including adding some flashing signals. And we have learned that the light poles that we have on site need to reduce. They were at 30 feet, they're going to go down to 15, which is per guidelines. That's pretty much it at a high level. Moving into the floor plan, we've got, onto the floor plan, we've got just a few changes here. So one of the things we have done is we've been coordinating continually at this level in construction documents with mechanical, with all of our consultants, with structural, and these sometimes cause little minor changes. And what we're seeing is that there are small mechanical rooms that we've had to reconfigure slightly. In some cases, it just sort of bumps over some spaces. We've maintained, as I said, all the program integrity. Everything is the same size, the same number of spaces. But there, you'll see, I think there are 4 or 5 little mechanical room revisions down here on the first floor. I should say on the left-hand side of the screen, you're seeing the design development plan. On the right side, you're seeing the 60% CD plan. You'd have to look very close to see any changes. One of the other things, we're always looking as we develop the design further to save money, be a little bit more efficient, but then work towards some of the overarching goals of durability and maintainability. So in this cost estimate, which we'll be talking about later with the project is on budget, we did look at terrazzo flooring for the first floor from the gymnasium all the way through the cafeteria. We wanted to get a price on that, so it's something that we can continue to talk about, but it represents a better durability, long-lasting. It'll work better with the moisture and the in and out coming from multiple different directions and with all the community use. So that's something that we have in the budget right now. If I go up to the second floor, you'll see just a couple more mechanical room changes. In this case, we did have to take away one of, I forget the number, I think it's like 15 staff toilets. One of the wings, the southernmost wing here, happened to have 2 staff toilets at the beginning of the wing. All the other wings have a single staff toilet on each floor for each wing. We were just trying to increase it, but it turns out that we needed that space for mechanical. So we are still well above the code requirements, and the distances are very short to get to toilet rooms. But this also happened on the third floor, next floor up. And here we had a few more changes. As our plan developed, again, we're working with structural, we're putting in bracing, sometimes walls get fatter. We found that the STE rooms were getting just a little bit smaller than they should. So we did a slight adjustment. We kind of pivoted the storage so that we could get those rooms restored back to their proper program size. And that's really it. These are really just small little adjustments. Does anybody have any questions on the plans or the site that I could answer?
I do have a question. Were there any changes to the geothermal bore field? A few meetings back, we had discussed that. There would be 10 fewer wells that would be needed based on the information that was collected in the field, the test loops.
And I think the vote was to keep the 10 wells
Yeah,
as is at that time.
That's,
At
yeah,
some point, I forget the number, we had 120. Then the guy said, well, the school will function with 100. And then we as a committee decided, keep the 120 because we'll need that potentially for its future expansion.
Yeah.
It'd be cheaper to drill them now than it will 10 years from now. That was,
yeah, I just wanted to confirm, so, thank you. Yeah.
If we don't increase the size, will they run more efficiently, or would that not be a benefit, having more?
I don't think that the wells have, that level of the wells have an efficiency
Okay.
associated, because there's no moving parts,
yeah.
Okay.
just the pumps.
Push, I mean, it draws some energy, because there are some subtle efficiencies depending on the number of the well field. But you have more capacity with the additional wells.
Bob, I had a quick question about the gymnasium floor, which I assume will be hardwood like every other gymnasium. That's what we've been.
Athletic wood floor.
No.
Yeah, that-
I visited the Ashland School that our friends did just recently, Mendez School. I also visited a school in Medway. 5 of my grandkids play all these sports, so I'm at all these schools. But the thing about the Medway one, which is brand new, and the Ashland one, which is brand new, is they have a new method of racking the floors. In other words, if you go to Marathon, the floor is seamless. If you go to Ashland, every 4 feet, there's a joint that's about 1/8 of an inch wide, and then another 4 feet, and another joint. So I went online, like you do for everything I don't know a thing about, and I guess flooring guys now have this new racking method. My question is, I'm really bothered with that joint every 4 feet, because it looks stupid. It's tiny, not even 1/8 of an inch, but it's repetitive. Why do all the floors, for the last 50 years, they didn't have to do that? And
Easton has that.
are we gonna do it that way?
Well,
Not now.
I assume, now, in the literature, I read the literature, and it's to take up for expansion and contraction. But given, Marathon was built on the same wetland that everything else is, and we don't have a problem with that for buckling or shrinking. I just don't understand it. It looks like the flooring guy has done something to cover their butt and for potential expansion and contraction. Because it's something you can look at and just,
we can definitely look at it.
yeah, if there's some reason that's legitimate, fine. But if it's just because it's easier for flooring guys, I'm not as fine.
Have you been doing it the last 3 or 4 projects that way?
Apparently, one of our recent projects, you said Easton?
We had an argument about it recently.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Same,
same thing. It's every 4 feet, I think.
I felt the same way Mike did when I first saw it. The schools we opened in the last 2 years kind of
Yeah.
flipped to that, and I don't know
Yeah.
the origin of
Yeah.
why it flipped to that method.
It's got to be pretty recent they're doing it. I just, if there's no really good reason, I'd rather have the floor look like
Yeah.
Marathon or like the high school's been up there
It's a
50 years.
different thing.
Right.
I think you're not, I don't want to go on a limb, but you're giving more spaces for more things to expand as opposed to pushing all the way to the edge, because essentially if there's no gaps, you're telescoping all the way out.
Yeah.
This gives more subtle reliefs on an interim basis,
Yeah.
but I don't know if there's real detriment to not doing it, because as you pointed out back in Marathon, we weren't.
Yeah, if you look it up, the flooring guys refer to it as racking. And what they do is they do the floors in 4-foot sections. And they provide that extra little space for that reason, and, you know, maybe there's a good reason for it, but
Oh,
it looks,
okay.
you know, doesn't look good.
I guess we actually don't
We
have
don't
it
have that at
at
Easton.
one of
But
our
anyway,
recent
but it-
schools,
but
but,
that was my 2 cents, Robert. The other thing, I noticed, because I was there for the design review meeting where they discovered the fact that we had 30-foot light poles instead of 15-foot light poles. And of course, now we're gonna do 15. But I thought I saw something from Chris Eberly that said it was gonna cost us more to do 15-foot poles. Now, that would make sense if we had more light poles.
Correct, you'll have to change the spacing, and so you'll end up
Well,
with more quantity.
But then he said, no, the same number of poles, they're just gonna change the fixture. But it was a big number. I just hope somebody would look at that.
We did, we thought originally, because of the timing
Yeah.
of the estimate and then the
Yeah.
turnaround. So we initially said, well, if they're 30 feet and we're gonna go to 15 feet, then we need more. We need to
Poles.
change the spacing, we need more.
That would be, I'd assume the same
And we
thing.
told in the same time, so we decided to price that and ask the electrical engineer, because we only have days, not
Okay.
more than that.
Okay.
The electrical engineer did the calculations.
Okay,
Changing the head on those fixtures is enough
yeah,
with the spacing we had.
okay,
So then we went back to the estimator and said, no, we don't need more.
okay.
Of the
So
poles.
it isn't
So
gonna
you're
be
using
that
a-
big.
You're using
different heads.
same location with a shorter pole, but with a different head. that
different
throws them.
spread, different throw.
And that's still dark sky compliant, everything
And
we
he
need to
said
do for
that's-
this
So you
one.
get the same illumination with 15-foot poles instead of 30.
Yes.
So is the net
But
positive?
not a
negative?
crazy number, actually.
I
Head's
think
probably more
it's a,
expensive.
the head's more expensive, the pole is
Yeah.
less. It's a wash.
Yeah, all right, great, thank you. That's it for me.
okay, I'll move on to some of the other
One
design.
other thing, I mentioned to Chris, it hasn't made its way to the design team yet, but we'll probably, I think we talked a little bit, we'll probably end up with a gate here now that we have that parking lot. We want to make sure there's no people kind of shortcutting the line, so we'll probably have a gate that I would recommend adding over here, so when parents come and pick up and drop off, you want them to come in the way they normally do and loop around. You don't want a second valve, if you will, for a shortcut around. So right now, we have 2 gates in the back, but we'll probably add our 3rd gate there that can be controlled
Yeah.
when needed. Sorry, Bob.
Yep, no problem. So the next slide just captures a summary of before the summer hit, which seems like a long time ago now. We had user group meetings. We also met with Tim and on facilities and maintenance. And really, we just had very minor, what we expected is very minor adjustments and changes. Some of them will probably still be ongoing discussions. Classroom podiums versus desks will be ongoing. We heard from special education that we just needed to increase a little bit more of the glass, and we did that. Music switched over to carpeting. We actually did a study of the cafeteria to keep the stage clear in case performances were set up and can fit the seats. It's a little snug, but it could work. We've also learned since then that there is a desire to use the platform to help disperse the students a little bit better and create variety of lunch space, and something that happens right now. And then just minor changes to make sure we accommodate 3 dumpsters, and we're looking at something we'll talk about later, I guess a pump head house with potentially some additional space there on the site. Next slide is the program, no changes. Everything's pretty much the same. The MSBA would like to see that. Minor revisions to furnishings, layouts. Next slide shows just something that we brought to the committee in the, as we started construction documents, and we did look at going all brick, not using the big block, trying to keep the building scaled. The brick we're using is a very large, it's called a Norman brick, but proportionally, it's long and narrow, so it doesn't look thick and clunky. And that kept us on budget as well. We did have the opportunity to save a little bit more, but for the sake of scale, next slide shows an example of what that brick looks like. Just a little bit more tactile and accommodating for the students at the ground level. We have also been developing the exterior. Nothing substantive has changed. We went from sketchy diagrams that we had in DD to more photorealistic images, which is what you see down here at the bottom of this long front elevation. You can see the gymnasium on the left, the cafeteria on the right, the media center right in the middle. And the next slide just shows a closer view. Continuing to develop, we're making refinements to the canopy. Yeah.
Bob, is any of that long brick on the front of the building, or is it only in the back wings?
It's the entire building.
Oh,
We have
okay.
different colors.
Okay, I couldn't really tell with the front. So that top part is the whole thing is long bricks. Top is red, bottom is grayish?
Yeah, the very top large classroom wings are the off-white color, and then in the front of the school, yes, the red, and then the gray or beige color is also brick.
Thank you.
You don't have a picture of the off-white color brick, right? Just the rendering?
Yeah, just in the rendering. And so I'm just scrolling through some other views just to get a feel for what it's shaping up to look like. And then the last slide I have is some information that came out of future-proofing. So one of the things we wanted to be ahead of and look out for the community for is if you were to add on, we've reserved the space to add on and to do it very efficiently on the ends of each wing. So that would be 2 classrooms on all 3 floors, so 6 classrooms on each wing. That's 18 total. Represents a whopping 25% increase over an already larger enrollment. So I think a lot of capacity. We talked to all of our engineers and consultants and made sure that duct piping sizes and everything could accommodate. We looked at code and egress requirements to make sure door widths, the stair widths, the number of toilet fixtures, plumbing fixtures, everything could accommodate. A couple of things that we learned is that you would need to upsize the DOAS unit, the main mechanical unit, to have higher capacity to handle these future classrooms. The benefit, and we'll talk about this later when we get into cost, would be obviously that it would also run more efficient at less than capacity, have a longer life. So that's something that again, we'll be talking about later. I don't know if it's on this slide, but we did learn that we would need to add lavatory sinks. So we don't need to add plumbing fixtures like toilet or urinals or anything like that, or new bathrooms, but there's an increase of lavatory sinks required. Could be part of the addition, but that would be one of the few things that that might need to increase.
The sinks would be in the addition, though.
Yeah, that's the plan.
Yeah, it's like 2 hand washing sinks per
Gotcha.
floor, per wing.
And I think we reported early on that when you add on, things like even the numbering system for the rooms, the letters identifying the exterior stair for fire safety, that all remains the same. I thought that we were eclipsing the outdoor bathroom that we have, the bathroom on the
Yeah.
end of the middle wing. It turns out we're not. So everything's good.
I have one just quick question. If you back up 3 slides, it was more on the look, the design.
This one?
Nope, go back to the one after you show the elongated brick. Yeah, so that one at the bottom. How come where the cafeteria is, the majority of the cafeteria where the window is all red, a little bit of gray, then to the right it's gray, where the rest of the building is top, bottom, top, bottom? It just doesn't, is there a reason why it's
No, I
topped up that
agree
way?
with you. We are catching up with ourselves on our team about that.
Okay.
At one point, I think it may have been a different volume, maybe was in a different position.
Okay.
But I think that's a good eye, because that's something that we're talking about as a team internally, probably change. We do have, the base on the building is very low intentionally
Yeah.
upon entry, but it does rise a little bit taller in the classroom wings, in the courtyards, and in the gymnasium, which is purposeful.
Right.
But that one anomaly, which is the kitchen,
Yeah.
I think
Well, it gets larger because it stays in scale. I mean, with a larger front, yeah, I
Right.
can see that. Excellent, thank you.
Bob, how much, at Marathon, after the New York disaster, the school shooting, we changed a lot of the glazing, particularly in the cafeteria. We went from plain old regular glass to now bulletproof glass.
Yeah.
How much of the,
Attack resistant, not
Yeah.
bulletproof. I just want to, there's a different rating there, significantly different rating.
but if we accounted for all that in this school,
We've had security workshops and have recorded scopes like that that are included in the cost estimate.
So it's in there or not in there?
It's in there, we're hardening the ground floor.
Okay.
The same,
Yeah,
that
that-
attack
that's
resistant
pretty much the
level
only one.
glazing, not bulletproof, but attack resistant.
Okay, great. I didn't want to forget it and get caught at the end. Thank you.
Yeah, there are a number of things too, just as a reminder, where the layers, each wing of the school, each floor has a lock-off.
Yeah,
So there's kind of like layers of lock-off
Right.
within the school as added protections.
great.
Excuse me, what's the difference between bulletproof and attack resistant?
It's a great question. So, attack resistant is a certain duration of time that someone would have to physically keep smashing a window with a blunt object like a baseball bat, and it delays the entry of the person. What it serves as is kind of like your windshield. So when you break the glass, it actually stays together. It doesn't drop to the ground like as if you broke a plate glass window. So even though you're smashing it and you're eventually getting a baseball size hole through it, it's still staying as a solid element as opposed to shattering, so somebody actually can walk through it. But it's not bullet resistant. So small, high powered projectiles will pass through that. Those types of applications in schools are just at the administration office where essentially the receptionist is, where there's that first kind of vestibule area. Those are the areas where in schools, school designs where that type of window is added in. It's very thick, it's 4 inches thick.
Depending on what ballistics level you're at, yeah.
But at least 4 inches thick, I think, at that location.
Got it, okay, thanks.
And there's a lot more literature out there. If you want stuff offline, we could certainly supply to you as well. Back
Right.
at the time of Marathon, that was kind of newer technology, and there was a
Yeah.
lot more competing, and there wasn't a lot of track record on those. So now it's kind of, unfortunately, more the norm, and so there's a lot more settled-in versions of that.
So I think that future proofing was the last slide I had. I don't know if there are any more questions on
Any questions on design?
Nope.
ED to 60% CDs.
Now, what happens with the 60%? That gets submitted to the MSBA? And
correct.
you want us tonight to vote as to whether or not we're going to submit it to the MSBA? Is that correct?
That's correct. We're going to talk you through the numbers before we request that vote. So if there's no other questions on design, which we can always circle back to, you're going to talk a little bit about cost here. And so where we are, we're at the 60% construction document estimate. We've done a parallel estimate with our firm, with AM Fogarty, and the designers have carried PM&C. They both priced the same set of documents. They came in with a delta of about 400,000 spread between the two. We're below our original budget, and we also have two alternates priced that we're going to talk about tonight. Alternate number one is upsizing that rooftop unit that Bob was alluding to in the future proofing. So by upsizing that unit now, it can run at a more optimal capacity and provide future expansion for an upcharge of about $275,000, which we'll get to in a minute, versus having to buy an entirely new unit by the time you go through and actually do that addition at the end of the school building wing, and that would be a higher amount. The second item has to do with the mock-up, and I'm going to talk about that individually in this slide coming up. So, and you can fact check me here because you know a little better than I do, but right now we've estimated this rooftop unit upgrades. And so essentially what this does is it allows for that expansion of those classrooms, and it increases the capacity from 24,000 CFM to 32,000 CFM of the unit. It fits within the building's current design configuration. And this larger unit allows it to operate at a lower speed, potentially increasing the longevity of the units. And to do it as a standalone unit would cost significantly more, and we're estimating that at about $360,000 at today's dollars, plus the escalation of whatever time you would implement that modification. And so the suggestion tonight is that if you upsize the mechanical equipment today for the $275,000, you'll forego the future upgrade at $360 plus the compounded escalation at that time. So we think it's prudent. Where we're tracking overall is under budget, and so we have the ability to make that decision now if the committee chooses to.
Is there a way to assign potentially an offsetting number on the bullet point that talks about increasing life expectancy? Does anybody put math to that to say, you know, you will save this amount of money if you upside, as well as avoiding paying today's dollars with an escalation?
I'm not sure if, I can ask the question to the engineer to get an answer for you. I don't have the answer about how long theoretically it would last longer than if, you know, is it 20 to 22 years or 20 to 24 years? I don't know the
Well, it
answer.
would be, whatever it is, it would be a plus. That's all.
I
It may
think
not be
it's
a
gonna be
significant-
running, yeah, it will
Yeah.
be running at a lower rate, or, you know, it's not gonna be working as hard
Yeah,
to supply the air to the building as it's designed now.
Yeah.
So, yes, it'll definitely have some more longevity, cause all the parts will be working less hard.
The technology being what it is, though, assuming we had to put in this in 10 years, I get the guy that's doing all the energy stuff going and says, too bad you did this thing 10 years ago. We got this new one now that'll do the job and do it better. So effectively, we pay for it twice that way. You know, a lot of things you buy and to save money for the potential addition. By the time you get to the potential addition, the thing is either died already or dying, or the engineer will say, geez, we got the new, greater thing, and you're gonna pay twice for it. Is there any danger of that? Is that,
It's always a possibility, Mike. I mean, you know, technology is one of those things that does more rapidly evolve, right? And certainly it's escalated from the 1950s. It was a much slower progression and changeovers, like more tried and true. And in today's day, as you're mentioning,
Yeah.
the technology edge of it does move more rapidly. In your case, it also depends on which edition goes first and how many. You know, I think, you know, the first edition, this is smart money. You know, by the time you get to the second or third, depending on when those occur, yes, you probably will be investing in different technologies. But if you compound the first edition with the longevity extension of your equipment, it probably makes sense in today's dollars.
so Tim, you deal with this crap every day. And I know we've replaced the boilers at the middle school that are only 10 years old. What do you think about this?
Well, we talked about this pretty extensively in our internal meetings, and I think, you know, I had the same concerns. Honestly, I think if we, in the next however many years, 5 years, had to put an addition on the building, upsizing it now is the way to go.
Yeah,
If we didn't do it, we talked about what the alternatives to that would be, you know, potentially putting a separate unit on the roof to cover
that section.
that section, which, you know, becomes more problematic. I think upsizing it now saves a lot of money, as Jeff just alluded to, definitely in that first edition, you know? So if it's within that 10 years, if we're out 20 years, then it's a different conversation, right? Now we're looking at replacing a unit or potentially getting to the point where we're gonna replace a unit anyway.
Yeah.
So I think that was kind of the internal, you know, it took them a lot to convince me
Yeah.
in the appropriate ways that this was the smart way to go.
Oh.
It's cheaper money to do it now than it will be to do it then, you know, by however much it, you know, figures out to. Either having to make sure structurally that we can handle a unit on that section
Yeah.
of roof and going
Yeah.
through that whole engineering process, and just upsizing it now and, you know, running it at a more efficient level.
I have a question for you, Susan. You know, with all the numbers that you and Carol have shared with the town and us about the demographics coming up, is there any point in time you can think of where what we're talking about would be almost, yes, it's going to be here by then? Or not? I guess, well, what's your best thought on when we would need an additional space like this?
Right, so, you know, as you know, we do our enrollment projections, and every couple of years, we do update them. But the history has shown that we are still beating our projections. So even though years ago our projections were way off, I mean, hundreds and hundreds, we're still going beyond. History will show that we're still going 100 beyond our projection year after year. So when we have another enrollment projection, where will that put us? It just continues to go. And the building has not stopped. I know a lot of people think that, Hopkinton is built out, but it does still continue. And when people move out for various reasons, they're moving in with kids. So we are beating our projections. And the danger, of course, is, when you build something like Marathon and you put an addition on during construction, and then put an addition on right after construction. So we're just very leery of that kind of history here.
Do I understand it correctly that we're anticipating, I think it's a similar question, but that we're anticipating within 5 years that the school as it's laid out won't be able to accommodate the students?
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, right now, there's, I don't remember do you remember the current enrollment of the 3 grades today together? But-
I don't.
I mean, the school is sized for about 1,200 students in the future configuration, regardless of the additions, and so we're not there yet today. So, unlike Marathon, where when they set out with that, they knew when we started the project that it wasn't gonna open and be able to handle the kids, and we had the MSBA move the metrics twice along the way. They built that capacity in this time around, so it's a much larger baseline. But to Susan's point, I mean, you drive around town, you still see development going on, so I don't know how that bakes into the overall. And there's obviously other developments on the other side of town and, that could impact it. So it is hard to put a number on it.
Right, and,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry, and so this added expense, even though it's still within the budget, this is essentially just a hedge, right? That we're gonna need to expand and need to get a bigger, better, stronger unit, and it's a savings of about 90,000?
Plus escalation, but yes, yeah, it's a
Plus
hedge,
escalation,
Chris,
yeah.
that's a fair assumption, yep.
Yeah. And to Mike's point, if the projections, those who did the projections and we did a good job, and we don't need to expand for another 10, 12 years, or maybe 15 years, that the technology would probably advance to the point that it would make sense to get a new unit as opposed to trying to put the stress on the bigger unit that we're looking for approval today.
And looking into a crystal ball, certainly the technology could change in the time frame of whenever that addition is, not knowing when that addition is. There are schools that are going air source heat pumps as opposed to tying into your geothermal system, how those are just coming online, last year and essentially. So the longevity of those systems, I think, doesn't have the track record in the Northeast that it has in other parts of the country. So it's hard to know, Chris, whether that future dedicated units associated with that 6 classroom addition will be as optimal as upsizing your existing unit. And so it is an educated guess, not knowing what's around the corner or the track record of those newer technologies that are just starting to be installed in some of your neighboring towns.
Right.
The other thing about this is just an outside air unit.
Right.
Yeah.
And the technology of an outside air unit hasn't
Dramatically
changed in the past,
No.
30 or 40 years.
Yeah, right.
So, I mean, there are obviously components but usually what they do is like there's the guts inside the box. So there are ways to upgrade these things over time anyway.
Right. I think the bigger jump you guys have already committed to, which is the
It's the
geothermal.
geothermal.
Like, that's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
If you were to say, buy me a gas unit that could handle this, I would say, to answer your question the other way, which is people are getting away from that, right? You're starting to see towns move away from the natural gas, but you've already made that investment with the geothermal. So this is capitalizing and balancing that investment.
I guess another way of getting around to the same question, Susan, is it's hard to remember all the numbers we worked with in designing the size of the school, but do you recall any point in the projections where we would have more than 1,200 students in this 2, 3, 4? I don't recall where we got to the maximum. So if you can confirm or deny that.
Right, so you have to keep in mind that we're using 2 different projections.
Yep.
So the MSBA uses a 10-year average. So they put together all their numbers and they come up with a 10-year average, and that's where we come up with what we're allowed to build according to MSBA, which is the 1195. Then we have the Arthur Wagman
Yep.
projections, which gives us year over year. And I don't recall, I'd have to dig back into his numbers, that with his numbers, we get beyond. I think they line up fairly well, which was one of the things that gave both Dr. Kavanaugh and I comfort in that one projection was not way off from the other.
Okay, so I mean, essentially, we're trying to understand where are we 10 years from now? Because if it's 10 years from now, we're probably better off waiting for newer technology. But if we're 3 or 4 years away, we'd have to have a significant increase in enrollment above and beyond the increases we've already projected. Is that an accurate statement?
I'll take a stab at that, Bill, if you want. Today, we have 985 students in grades 2, 3, and 4. And so if the projection is that we're getting to 1197, you would have to have 212 students join the Hopkinton Public Schools in only those 3 grades. That's not going to happen in the next couple of years. It's going to happen eventually, but not in the next couple of years.
I think when we always talk about years out, it's always years after the completion of the build too, so, you know, you're talking
Right.
years after 2027, right? So that's when the clock kind of starts.
The cost for the school is was 120 million, is that right, or somewhere in
Yeah,
that range?
124, yep.
So this is 0.2%?
Yep.
My math is right? This
Yep.
200 and whatever, 50,000 or 60,000?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so it's kind of a rounding error.
It's not wrong.
So, to kind of wrap up this discussion, we're talking about an alternate.
We're talking about an alternate, but the reason we're asking for you now is because we are at the 60% design level, right? So they're gonna wrap up the design the beginning of next year. So we do want the design team.
So unlike the alternates that go out to bid for construction, this isn't one of them.
I think we would prefer it not to be, but it could be.
You'd have to spec 2 different size units,
Yeah.
and you may have a different footprint of the dunnage or the duct penetrations
Yeah.
through the slab. So there could be,
All I'm thinking is, the numbers are all out there. We have no idea what number is gonna come back. So if the number comes back low, meaning we have extra money in the budget, it's easier to vote for things like this. Okay, that's all I'm saying. Whereas if we put it in now, would we still be at the budget, given what we have?
if we put it in now, we'd still, yeah, just to cut ahead 2 slides. So, the overall picture of the project is that, this chart here is the gross square area of the building hasn't changed. The construction cost at the time we signed the agreement with the MSBA was a budget of just under 125 million, so 124,954 and change. At the design development stage, we were at 123.5 million, which was before the summer.
Yeah.
And now we're at 123.7. So over the course of the last estimate in May until now, we've only upticked 200,000, including all the significant changes you guys have seen in drainage and all these other things that are out there. So right now, we're currently tracking $1.2 million under the budget
Okay.
before we entertain these suggestions.
And the math again, which I'm certainly not a math major, but it's actually 0.002.
Yes.
0.00, so it's 0.2%, not 2%.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and
if
just to give,
if the money's in the budget, then I kind of lean towards Tim's.
Yeah,
I just didn't want to, go back to town meeting and say, we're short $1.5 million because we got to put Tim's thing up there. But,
well, and I'll give you a recent example, Mike. When we put the addition onto the high school, we were able to tie into those systems.
obviously,
And, so
Yeah.
we tied into those boilers that we have there that are 24 years old
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Now, eventually, we're gonna have to replace those as they
Yeah.
come to end of life, but
By 2020.
it fit within our budget to put that addition on with what we had existing in the building, without having to upsize or upscale anything. Just an example of a recent project that we've done.
how do we settle this?
We were bringing up the old projections, we just wanted to clarify the question. So, obviously to get the average at 1,195 means it has to be over the 1,200 students at some point. And so the projections with the MSBA had it exceeding the 1,200 students in 2029, which was at 1,223, and then got up to over 1,300 by 2032, right? So, in order to have that average,
5 years.
yeah.
So you're within, you're well within a 10-year window.
Thanks for those
And,
numbers.
and to refresh you here and anybody following at home, the theory around the enrollment projections is, with the number of classrooms you have, you can just add one student to all of them, right, before you
Yeah.
start to feel the pain, then 2 students, and then when you get to 3 students, that's when you're like, okay, we need to trigger the additions, because it's that number of classrooms times that number of students is your go point.
So do we need a vote on alternate one, the RTU?
Or a head nod or a consensus, yeah, either way, yeah, if you want to take a vote or if you want to just.
Is everybody
consensus.
comfortable with voting on this tonight?
I do have a
Yes.
couple of questions. First is a larger RTU, is that a given for the expansion, or could there be other alternatives that would avoid, like, I don't know if it's even related to the geothermal.
Well, this is, to be clear, right, this is the DOAS unit, right, that we're
This is
upsizing,
air.
right, so this is the fresh air. You already have capacity in the geothermal, so, you already have the heat and cooling
Yep.
already baked into the project, and this is the other end of that, it's the fresh air that you've got to do to offset the occupants in the space.
So there really isn't, there's no other real way around it.
Okay, so that answers the first question. The second question is, given that we are trying to accommodate this within the budget, we have some room, does this make it to the top of our list of items that we would like to include? Or are there other items to consider?
There aren't items that we're bringing to you today that we're saying, this is a nice to have that you should consider adding, or things, we've been tasked with the question of, what if we have to build again, right? And so this is a response to that. What's the smart way to spend tax dollars? So that's the origin of this conversation. And so we've gone round and round about it because it affects many things, right? We've now added the parking, so we've solved, how do we solve the parking to make sure they're there? We've solved it by keeping the extra capacity in the geothermal. So this is the next layer on that, just to make sure that if you have to pull that lever, it's a very minimal impact, compared to a maximum impact had you not considered these things. Simpler, adjustments to the pipe width and sizes, right, and anything buried. We're really trying to make sure we don't dig up your site to whoever the future committee is and future consultants that have that task under you can do it with the least impact to the existing operations of the school. There is always nice to haves though, if you want to throw them on the list, that's up to you guys. We're just responding to the questions that were posed to us.
So could we have a motion to approve alternate number 1 for the capacity increase and future proofing?
So moved.
Thank you, sir.
Second.
Mr. Groot, thank you. Chris,
Yes.
we're voting yes. Thank you.
Yes.
Liam, thank you.
Yes.
Yes. And I'll vote yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the second one is an interesting alternate. And so normally on a project, we build a mock-up.
Yeah.
Right? We always do, right? We build it for a couple of reasons. We build it for constructability, to make sure that the team assembled, all the contractors know how to implement the designer's details. So that's a given on the mock-up itself. A lot of commissioning agents want to do performance testing on the mock-ups. They always start there because they want to say, I want to test this installation to make sure they put the window in right and they sealed all the gaps. The particular consultant that we have assigned to the MSBA wants to build a mock-up that is essentially its own little shed. And so he terms it as a 6-sided mock-up, because it has 4 walls, a floor, and a ceiling. And so he wants to test the air entrainment of that unit. I want to take a step back and refresh the committee that you're pursuing passive house. In order to get to the MSBA 3+1 percentage points, we've committed to going passive house, which means we are going to do a full blower door test, which means you literally pressurize the building and see if any leaks come out, right? And so this is a way to do a similar mock-up on a small scale and a 10 by 10 versus the entirety of the building to make sure you work out any of those details. And so this particular commissioning agent, Thrive, has been doing this for about 8 years. Most of the other MSBA commissioning agents don't request this. He feels there's value in it. There certainly is. We've had him on multiple projects. We've argued not to do it on some projects. We've accepted it on others. It's not a cheap mock-up because a traditional mock-up would be kind of a two-sided L shape. You know, now you're mirroring that L and you're throwing a roof on top of it. So if we're going to go the distance of making it a performance mock-up, and we're kind of committing to that because of the other testing we're going to do down the road, there's value in that. We also know that Hopkinton has water bans over time, right? And so to make sure you have the grass take on your new athletic fields, to make sure you deal with dust control, we've been talking to the design team about having a temporary water well put into the site in order to mitigate any water bans in town. We know there's water on the site. We know we can pump water out via a pump and then can irrigate the soccer fields when that takes hold, and can use it as temporary dust control during construction. So the design team proposed that we take that 6-sided little shed and make it a permanent structure, and actually make it the wellhead, and leave that as a permanent well for the school to use should they need to irrigate that field long-term, or fill up and irrigate other spaces around the other schools in town. Other schools in town have access to that water well. So it's a bit of a combination of the means and methods to get the building built, to guarantee, or not guarantee, but to give greater likelihood that the grass is usable early on versus fighting with it for several years, which is the way many athletic fields can go, and trying to do something that's in keeping with sustainability. And so, you know, personal thought that I had that I wanted to throw on the table is sustainability, right? We build these mock-ups in other towns and then we crush them and we throw them out. What if we put a plaque onto the wall and talked about that we didn't spend this money only to throw it out, we reinvested in it, we found a use for it, and here's this little building. It may look a little funny because it looks just like the big building but mini, but it served a purpose, and it was, you know, keeping that money in the project versus a throwaway cost. So kind of, there's a lot packed into that, and that's why I kind of wanted to kind of talk about the different layers that are there. But at a minimum, we would keep the L-shaped mock-up, right? So that's kind of baked in there. And what we're talking about here is for, you know, 100,000 plus or minus, and it could be a little plus by the time we detail it and draw it and all that. But for another 100,000 or so, we could make it this permanent little shed that becomes the wellhead for the temporary to permanent well. So wanted to kind of put that all out there, because we did put the temporary well in the estimate, so that part's already in there.
Well, that's in the 103?
The water,
the
the temporary
base price.
well, but there's permitting implications that we have to go through at Concom, and we have to bring that up tonight. So we're kind of gonna have to play catch up with permitting, that we want to now add this in here to put in there. So there's a couple of moving targets why this is more time sensitive tonight.
What would the square footage of this mock-up be?
100 square feet, 10 by 10.
Yeah, 10 by 10. So probably even less, probably the inside. If we did 10 by 10 on the outside, it'd be, you know, 80 square feet kind of on the inside. So enough room for the pump itself, you know, the electrical equipment associated with it, and whatever tools are needed to maintain it, essentially.
Okay, because you got my attention on storage, thinking you can always use storage, but it really wouldn't be other than tools for that particular well.
Yeah, I mean, you could use, I mean, Tim will find a way to pack stuff in there. They're, you know, these guys always
Yeah.
do. You
I've
know.
been in these little well buildings and there's not a lot of stuff in there.
Right, we flirted with the idea of making it bigger, but then that, you know, it's not a cheap building in itself when you look at the cost of that little square footage. And obviously, we want to be mindful of your money. I mean, we could certainly build this bigger, and it could have more storage, but it'll be a very expensive shed.
Where would it go?
Yeah, back to the side.
That's on mine, yeah. Wrong way. There we go. So we're proposing to locate it in this corner here, so at the kind of proximate to the parking lot and the athletic field. That's correct. where you're
That's
looking,
correct.
right?
Yep.
So outside of the play structure, it would be a kind of a in view of the boulevard as people kind of come into the campus. So it will be a talking point, which is why I came up with the idea of the sign, to make sure we educate the public that we're not throwing away money, and it's a way to reinvest after doing the performance testing that we wanted. But essentially, it would be kind of front and center as you enter the site at that particular location. We could shift it around a little bit, but we do have wetland setbacks on the other side of the site, and we are kind of hemming that in with parking and driveway access. But we could shift the location if that prominence was not desirable.
Jeff, my understanding is a mock-up is made up of the materials, windows, doors, pretty much everything in the school in one place, so you can see how it goes together.
That's correct.
Interacts with one another. The school is giant. To take that and reduce it to 10 by 10, it's gonna be the world's god-awful ugly building that you've ever seen.
Yeah, it's gonna look awkward.
It is. To say it like it is.
It's gonna look awkward.
So I would say hire somebody like Mike Shepherd for 10 grand to build a building like the other wellhead. And it looks good. And it's got clapboards and a door, that's all it needs. I like the idea of the mock-up, and I can see why we need it, but it would be a ugly building. And to put it in front of the school is just crazy. Just my 2 cents.
I mean, one thing you got going for you is this, our building is all brick.
Yeah.
So there's, if
But
there
you're
were
right about the
multiple
mock-ups.
materials, then it would really be chaos.
I can remember Marathon, they spent a lot of time building this thing, and then at the very last thing, when they were done, they tore it down, threw it in the dumpster. Windows, everything, just, but to something,
Shrink this.
it's probably worth $100,000, because you're gonna have that in windows and doors and siding and insulation and foam and mastic. This has got everything that the whole school has in a 10 by 10 thing. But ugly.
But to Mike's point, nothing can be salvaged from that if we decide not to?
No, they don't.
You pay for it, it's
Okay.
not worth it.
Yeah.
They'll say, Mike.
We've had that conversations many times on many projects, and
Yeah, but-
it never ends up being
So
financially
you
worth
mentioned
it.
in your explanation, you've argued for and against. Sounds like you're arguing for because you had these other ideas, but based on the fact it probably will not be the most appealing looking building, does that kind of take away some of those other advantages and we're back to?
So, yeah, I mean, and I don't have a horse in the race. I mean, whatever you guys, it's a conversation, right? So this particular commissioning agent feels very strongly about it. Some of those other projects, we weren't going passive house and we weren't doing the flow blower test. So, 5-6 years ago, it made a lot less sense to do it than it does today. On the last job, we VE'd it out because we were bidding in COVID, and he wrote long dissertations to the MSBA about why this was the wrong decision, but the town didn't care because we had to get a project we could afford.
Yeah.
So out it went. We can do performance testing on the existing building. I mean, that is totally an option. This is not an absolute have to have. The designers would like to have a mock-up to verify that the contractors know how to implement it. So again, I would advocate for the L-shaped mock-up,
Yeah.
At least, right?
Agreed.
That is
You
the
got
throwaway
corners,
cost,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
That happens on every job and has for, all of time. If you've ever been to Boston, you see them much, much larger too. They can be kind of honkingly large. But I think a mock-up is necessary. We have that budgeted in here. The well came up, partly with the work we're doing over at Hopkins too, where we need to keep the dust down, right? You got Marathon next door, you have a Butters, but you also have a water ban in town. So Tim had a water well on the property there, so we're working to resurrect that and use that for the temporary purposes on that particular project. And so that's kind of how this conversation is morphed. And we're trying to find value in a way to do all this, but it may be, to Mike's point, it may not be the intended consequence you want in the end. But, if we do choose not to do it, then there is a battle ahead with the commissioning agent that we'll have to fight on your behalf and the MSBA about why you don't want to do it. But the passive house thing was one of the things kind of pushing me in this project.
As I recall, again, going back to Marathon, we wanted a well, but the MSBA wouldn't let us do it. It was something to do with energy.
It was the lead.
Lead at that time was not.
Because of the
yeah,
lead thing.
right.
But now wells are back on again.
Now, wells are allowed if you're irrigating for an athletic field, essentially
Yeah,
to preserve
okay.
an asset, but
So-
not
so-
to water the shrubs around the school.
So I would propose we drill a well, we run power to it somehow, temporary or otherwise. The pump is going to be at the bottom of the well. There's nothing in the building or on top of the pipe. It's just a pipe. And it goes out to feed the the sink, the water fountain, the athletic field. So the well part is, given what we're spending for these other wells, is dirt cheap.
Yep.
And we can put a 5 horsepower pump 500 feet down. It'll pump water like crazy. It doesn't need a building at this point. If Mike Shepherd's still alive, we'll build it later. It's just, L-shaped, great. to put all that stuff in a 10-foot cube, Jeff, it's just gonna be awful looking.
So
If we could hide it somewhere, and it's not worthwhile. 10 feet, you can't get a wheelbarrow in there once the wellhead's in there, you know, so. I don't know how everybody else.
So the L shape obviously is a lot less expensive, but we can't do the pressure.
You wouldn't be able to do the pressure. You could do like an individualized window test, but not the
Seal it,
pressurization, not all the connection
And I'm
details.
not familiar with what the role is of this commissioning agent. How difficult can he or she make the rest of this process if they're gonna put their foot down? I'm not sure, is it our decision ultimately?
It's ultimately your decision, and then, you sent us to then fight the fight. And so, it's fine. At the end of the day, we'll fight it. Like, I wrote long letters, and he wrote long letters back, but then it was over, and he delivered the rest of it, and the project was not a problem. He then tried again during when we went to bidding to have us build the other two sides out of drywall and studs, so he could still do his pressure testing, and had that written into the spec. But by the time we got to the field, you're looking at it, you're like, there's no point. So we did certain testing on the mock-up, like the air vapor barrier and some pull tests and things like that. But we did most of the performance testing on the actual building itself and not the mock-up on that particular one.
So what is our recourse if we build a building and it doesn't pressure test? Because we didn't do this to kind of make sure it definitely would.
It's hard to undo it when it's not right.
But it's also hard to undo it. But even if you did the mock-up, it's
It
still a risk.
doesn't mean it's gonna be
Yeah.
right.
So, so on the last two projects, we didn't know, right? We had never done a pressure testing of the whole building. It had been done in isolation. And I was very nervous that we weren't gonna pass, but we ended up passing with flying colors. We worked with the contractor early on to set the tone. Now, those jobs were construction managers, so you had a little higher level of quality control in the implementation, a little more eyes on the site monitoring stuff. We are going with the general contractor here, so there's less physical supervision with those type of people. So, it's a little different, but it can all still be done. And, that just means that we have to make sure we do better due diligence with the implementation of that. But there's no guarantees. But the ugly truth of it is, if you don't pass the pressure test, it's very difficult to figure out the point of failure. Right? Because think about it, everything's covered. All the walls are covered, all the windows are covered.
Million
You can
places.
only test at the end when everything's done. So now you would have to literally rip out finishes, and so nobody ever wants to be there. And, at the end of the day, it may jeopardize the passive house and that kind of stuff. On a job that isn't going that way, it's kind of just, that's not a good thing, but the stakes aren't as high, I guess is another way to say it.
Yeah. On the other hand, we could have a 10 by 10 cube that passes everything.
Perfectly,
And the
yeah.
building
building
itself.
doesn't.
Yes.
Okay, and that's important.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
a way to
Yeah.
work out the details that are there with the people that are performing it to have a better,
Chance.
less chance of risk,
Correct.
right?
So if we decide not to
Proving your
do
odds.
this, what role can we or you folks play in working with the contractors to make sure they do the job that needs to be done to the best of the ability?
Yep. So there's always an option to have more oversight, whether you bring in another, engineer that has the ability to do more spot checking, whether we do an additional service with the MSBA's agent to do more spot checking. There are ways, to have more people looking out for your benefits than just relying on the contractor and their one superintendent out on site.
What would that cost?
It would, certainly less than the $100,000, but it would depend on the frequency of how often you would want them out on site. And obviously, if things are going swimmingly in the beginning, you can dial that back. If things are not going swimmingly in the beginning, you dial it up.
Yeah, I guess my feeling is, and the question that someone else got to before me was, spending that $100,000, again, that's kind of nothing in the grand scheme of the project, but if that 6-sided 10 by 10 doesn't mean that we are guaranteed to have the full test done the right way, then it's a gamble either way. And I guess part of me feels it'd be better to gamble on having a little more on-site oversight, especially if it's at a cost savings, even if it's, the $100,000 to build a building, even if we just destroyed it afterwards. Because I agree with Mike, it'd be an eyesore, but I wouldn't care if it would guarantee passing the second test or the big pressure test. Let's say go ahead and do it. But if there's still risk to it, I think the money might be better spent having more on-site supervision.
can we not just go to the guy we hired to make sure this passes and say, give us everything we need to make sure this passes? And just follow his suggestion, because then most likely it will pass.
He would suggest a six-sided mock-up.
Yes.
He's also a small company. It's him. It's basically him. And so, you know, I think he kind of does some of these things in his repertoire because it means he doesn't have to spend as much time, you know, monitoring because there's more checks and balances, you know, when he's not on site. And so there's a lot of nice things about the performance testing, but I'm not sold on it either. I've fought this fight before. And we've got away from it on other projects too. So it's if that's the direction the committee wants to go, we're fine bringing that back up. And then I'll ask that question, what's it gonna take for you to feel comfortable? Do you need more site visits and what's the quantity?
Yeah.
And if not, we can bring in other consultants, right? We have
That's-
we have plenty of people in the industry we work
Kind of
with.
where I get to, because in the residential industry, the HERS guy has become the guy that makes sure everything passes in the end. He's the one that suggests you do this, this, and this. And in most cases, in my experience, 99 out of 100 passes because you did all the things he wanted you to do. So I would hope this guy would give us the same kind of input, so we, you know, we don't want to skip something that's going to compromise the whole thing. It might be nickel dime at the beginning. And you know what I'm saying?
Yep, understood.
I assume that's why he hired him.
Is this particular action here, item here, something that could be visited again
Yes.
2 months, 3 months from
Yes.
now?
Yeah,
It's just a line in the spec so that when we go to bid,
Okay.
that all the subcontractors include the materials necessary to do it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to bid it as an alternate because it would make the award very tricky because every single person on the
Everybody's
job would have
involved.
some dollar line item with it, which would complicate any type of alternates you
Yeah.
accept.
So I
that
kinda
would
like
be-
the suggestion of let's keep the powder dry and either use it on consultants if we have to, or maybe as a group in 3 or 4 months, we decide, you know what, let's do it.
Okay.
I'm not sure what would change any of our minds.
Yeah,
because-
we'll also go back, I mean, we'll have his counter arguments that we can
Yes.
bring back to you guys for.
He will have counter
He will
arguments.
have a letter that I will put in your packet and
Thank you.
with
I
all
wouldn't want
kinds
to
of
have
excitement in
Barbara's
it.
staff spend very much time drawing up this thing.
We'll get them started on the L-shape, and we think we hear you guys loud and clear, so we'll proceed with L-shape. We'll get the letter drafted over to the consultant about why we don't think it's the prudent use of funds, and we'll go from there. Any other questions related to that? All right, so we already covered this slide, but we're trending 1% under budget, so we're $1.2 million under the approved construction budget, which is good news. And we are seeing good competition and bidding with recent projects, as you achieved recently on Hopkins. We were $2 million under budget. I don't know if the committee's aware of that, but we did get very favorable bidding results. So that is real, relevant, and current data that is important to keep in mind. Back to your agenda. So we have permitting updates to give you and then some miscellaneous project updates. But at some point tonight, I don't want to lose track of the fact that I will need you guys to approve, to authorize the owner's project manager to submit the 60% submission to the MSBA. So I don't know if you want to do that now. Just make sure I don't forget.
Will the 60% include alternate number 1 that we talked about earlier?
Yes, we'll include that in.
So we can either vote on alternate number 1 separately, or we can assume that it's included in the total vote. What do you guys prefer? Alternate number 1 was the,
You do one?
no, we didn't do it.
Yeah, we did.
We did vote on it?
We already voted on one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you did vote
Oh,
on
I'm
one.
sorry.
We
Yeah.
didn't vote on 2, but we don't have to.
You don't have to vote on 2.
We're going to just skip 2.
Pretty nice.
Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to approve the 60% CD submission to the MSBA.
I know, it's more than 2.10.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. How do we vote? Chris?
12 by 9.
Yes.
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 Mike, yes.
All right. I'm just gonna stop sharing screen so you don't see all the chicken scratch emails, but I wanted to give you a couple other updates. So MIPA, so we're getting ready to file the single EIR, and so the draft is being circulated amongst the consultants this week. Comments are due back, I think on Friday. We're gonna come back in front of you at your next meeting on October 8th with that package, looking for your authorization to go ahead and submit. We would then submit on October 15th, at which point it would be published in the Environmental Monitor, and it opens the public comment period. That comment period closes on November 22nd, and by the end of November, we would then receive a comment letter back, which should hopefully conclude this process and come with a certificate of issuance that we've resolved the MIPA process with any conditions they want to put on the project.
Then
We would
hopefully Susan will start getting money.
Yeah, then, yeah, once we have that in, then we then hand that certificate over to the MSBA, kick the doors in to get the money flowing back to the town, and then move forward from there.
Sounds great.
Anything else on MIPA? Nope. Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna pull up some of Chris's other, Chris gave me a few other cliff notes here. Planning board, we talked about Monday night was continued, but we're almost there, I think. I think we've resolved most of their open items. There are a couple other tweaks between all these parallel processes. There's always some kind of doubling back to get them up to speed. Concom is tonight. We are going to let them know about the permanent well that we're looking to put in there for irrigation. And that's kind of it for, we've also engaged the town leadership with the Hayden Row street improvements, so we've had those back and forth. We're working out the details of that. So that will then follow on its own path thereabouts. Any other permitting updates? Okay. A couple other miscellaneous items. So through the chair, we've got John to release some additional hazmat testing for the house at 147.
Okay.
So in order to put the demo package together, we just need to make sure there's no asbestos in the house. So that's, I think it was about $1,100 or something. Yeah, $1,100 that John is authorized to proceed there to do that testing. There's also some authorizations that we're working with John to do water infiltration. So as part of the permitting process, they've asked us to do some additional perk testing there. And so that is proceeding in the background. And, as Mike can probably fill you in more than I can, but there's been a lot of hats being changed in the building inspector department in this town. I think we're up to our third Mike in 1 month, and now we got a new guy.
The new building commissioner was appointed 2 Mondays ago by the Board of Selectmen. Yesterday was his first day. His name is Chris White. He's very well come through. He worked in Worcester, worked in Lowell, most recently from Rhode Island. Seems like a really, really sharp guy. Mike Savard is the zoning enforcement officer and assistant building inspector, and that's who we're dealing with. I got a message out to Chris to get together, just he and I, to kind of catch him up on what's going on. But I know that the building committee wants to meet with him and, to get things squared away. But he just started yesterday, so I anticipate it'll be at least a week or two before he'll sit down with us.
Right, so we'll reach out to him in that week or two and get that meeting and bring him up to speed and hopefully flush out any of his pet peeves from his past lives that he's gonna bring onto this project so we can get that accounted for in the.
Yeah, when, Wednesday when I left, they had delivered the hard copy of the plans for the Hopkins School. And Bob was saying, it's a roll about this big, and it was sitting on his desk when I left, so there you go. Hopkins School currently has a foundation-only permit, and we did it that way because we knew this guy was coming on, and he wanted to look at the rest of it, so I suspect there'll be no problem.
Okay, good. Couple other updates, just to put a dollar to that infiltration. So between the excavator and the civil engineer's work, it's about $12,000 to do that, all that additional water perk testing over at the site. So we're gonna work out that with John once we have all the firm numbers. We've also been meeting with the users, as Bob showed you kind of some of the updates from DD to CDs. We also reviewed the technology budget, and we remain on budget with that, so there's no major changes there. And the project is on track and on schedule to go out to bid in March. And so that's the track that we're working towards, so the overall project. We will bid the roadway project earlier and do an earlier start with the roadway project as we previously discussed, but the main project would bid in that March timeframe. The road would bid around the January timeframe.
So does that change if I remember correctly, April potential shovel in the ground, or is that still on?
The
track?
April shovel in the ground is for Hayden Row, right after Marathon Monday, if I
Yeah.
can have my way about it. But, you know, I want the roadway project to start as early as possible. Not everybody agrees with me on that, because it's gonna take more than the summer, so you either take your bite early or you take it later. But one way or another, it'll impact the school traffic, whether it's the,
Yeah.
you know, April, May, June, or September, October, November. So I am always on the favor of getting earlier start, but that's the April date. It would be the roadway work that would potentially start right after the marathon.
Do we have any other meetings with this group on the books, or?
October
So
8th.
October 8th, we would want to meet with this group to get you,
6
to
p.m.
authorize us to move forward with that submission to MEPA.
It's a live meeting, I assume, Jeff?
Yeah,
Okay.
it can be. I mean, I don't know. Well, this was a big meeting for us. There's a lot of content to cover. I don't know if we're gonna have a lot for that meeting.
MEPA
We'll,
might
we'll,
just be
we'll
the
see.
MEPA.
Yeah.
It could be a remote meeting if it's just the permitting updates. I think that's, because we're past the design updates, we're past the cost updates. It's really just permitting, feedback from Concom or Planning Board and MEPA, so we could probably do a remote meeting.
And do you foresee anything after that that you can see in the horizon?
We'll definitely get into our monthly rhythm, right, of, and then our next submission is 90%, which is going in
December, January.
December, January. So, yeah, so that, I'll get with Chris on the timeframe on that. But that would then be just like tonight. Here's the changes of design, here's the cost impact, authorize us to submit. But November should just be one meeting, and so should October, I believe.
Great. Is there anything else? Any other questions?
I think that's all.
Everybody's happy. I'll remind everybody, October 8th, 6 PM, next meeting. I'll entertain a motion to close this meeting.
So moved.
Thank you. Did you agree?
I'll second it.
Oh, great, William. Chris, you got
Yes,
something else to do, buddy?
plenty.
Yes. Yes.
I'll say yes. Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Yeah, it'll be late. It's gonna end up being later in January. We had it in February, but we're ahead of everything. We're ahead of everything on
Late
the
January
schedule
for
now.
the submission?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because we're this, I had to move all the way back here.
I keep telling you, like,